Okay, we've gone over the tibial nerve tensioning sequence. Now I'm going to take you through the slackening sequence. The slackening sequence is really important for you to know because anybody that has an irritated tibial nerve or even sciatic issues, you probably would want to try slackening before tensioning, because if the nerve is already irritated and then you go to tension it further, it might be unhappy with that decision. So sometimes we need to take tension off of nerves, in which case we use slackening to do that. So the neat thing about this is once you are familiar with how to tension any of these nerves, slackening is just exactly the opposite. So for example, if I put myself back into tibial nerve tensioning position, what we're going to do is go joint by joint and we're going to reverse all of the movements. So for example, instead of toe extension, I have toe flexion. Instead of ankle dorsiflexion, I'm going to go into plantar flexion. Instead of eversion, I now have inversion. So you can see that those three movements are exactly the opposite of what we did before. Now, instead of knee extension, I have knee flexion. Instead of hip internal rotation, I have hip external rotation. Instead of hip flexion, I have hip extension. And then instead of spinal flexion, I have spinal extension. Now with slackening of nerves, when it's being used because the nerve is irritated, we generally will use slackening for time. So you would actually have people put the nerve on slack and spend slacken the nerve, spend a little time there to take some tension and pressure off the nerve. If you don't have any issues like that, you can approach this just like you would any mobility work, and you can also choose drivers and you can move different joints during the slackening sequence. I will tell you that slackening is much harder for people with the tibial nerve because it requires great coordination and control, specifically of all the extensor muscles. And most people have mobility limitations in their hips and in their spine that prevent them from being able to go into a nice extension. So as the coach, you might have to get very creative in terms of how you set this up. Some of these drills can be done laying down on the floor. You might have to use additional props so that they can rest their foot on something so they don't have to use as much muscular effort to hold themselves into the position. But for people that are very capable, I think the challenge of this is actually one of the reasons why it can help people so much. Let me show you one more time how we get into this. Toe flexion, plantar flexion of the ankle, inversion, knee flexion, hip external rotation, hip extension, and then spinal extension. When I'm here, if I want to drive using movement, I can create lines or maybe circles at the hip. I can go from only the spine. You can really choose any movement that you want at any of the joints along the pathway of the nerve. Make sure when you're done to retest so you can figure out which variation is helping you the most.